that struck me very deeply. I thank you all for your work, all of you. But I have to say that I'm frustrated. Frustrated that despite all that we've been shown and told today, it has not influenced the DFO to shut the fishery down. So what is it we don't know? What is it we don't know? What criteria has the DFO used to justify this opening? I think knowing the answer to this question could help inform our action plan. So I ask again, what is it we don't know? Because what we've heard today would strike me as being what needs to be done. Thank you.
What is it we don't know about herring that we should know that might further influence the department? Wrong?
I need you to understand, I need to know what the DFO are using to justify the opening. Not what, not this.
Oh, I was gonna say, what is it we could know to influence them to, okay.
I think the DFO, like most agencies of this sort, is captured by industry. And as such, there is no science that you can produce that will convince them. What is needed is political pressure that can be exerted by voting, by raising help, by civil disobedience.
And my dad always said, never ask a barber if you need a haircut. And you just had a scientist, a world-renowned scientist, tell you that we have enough science. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that when we make changes like this, information is good and science is important, and despite coming from a country where people don't use science well anymore, we have to have science, but we also have to have people that are connected to the resource, and that's what you see here today. And then you have to have people that are motivated to make change, and I think that's where you are right now as Canadians. You have to make that change. You can't be looking for another publication. You can't be looking for more information. You have to demand that's what you want, and that's what you have to have. And I think you're there.
Thank you. Did that answer your question?
No, not really, because if we knew what has influenced the DFO to open the fishery.
Oh, that's simple. Jimmy Pattison.
That's just a name, that's just a person. What is the action? What can we apply about that knowledge that will inform an action plan that can be a part of how we can bring this fishery to a close?
You still assume that the decision that within DFO are based on science and based on rational discussion. They are not. In another debate about parasites and the Alexander Morton and parasites, I remember the head of research in Nanaimo doing a visit of the vessel Rigger in front of her staff, telling staff of DFO that Alexander Morton was spiking the fish with, that is, from a little bottle, putting parasites on the fish and releasing them in the water. And she was saying that in a very hierarchical organization, as head of research. Now, what does it do to a young scientist who starts work there? They better shut up about finding that it is not spiked, that it is dangerous for your career to actually support Alexander Morton. And I remember at the time, there were several workshops where DFO officials, all of the scientists, all jointly, all said that these parasites either don't occur or don't bother, and everybody knows that it is not true. So the same thing happened with cod in the East Coast. When the cod was going down the tube, They were very good scientists, including in DFO, who know what happened. But the political pressure was very strong to keep it that way. This is not about science.
Okay, another question, please?
Well, I just was gonna just add that I totally get your questions. We've been thinking about this for 25 years. We still haven't found an answer to your question. But there is a potential, I would think, that you could put some FOIs, Freedom of Information request, in order to expose some of that decision making. Whether it would be effective or not, I don't know. But sometimes, you know, I think many people in this room have worked on these issues and gotten FOIs, gotten the smoking gun, and still nothing changes. So I really want to go back to civil disobedience again. From my own experience, it works.
Well, and if you consider, 4 out of 5 main herring populations on the BC coast are now close to seine and gillnet fleets. But the reason that every one of those places closed was ultimately led by First Nations or local communities who forced DFO to shut it down. They have not responded to any other issue, whether it's economics or science. It's been community-led.
Great, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, Professor, but you're talking about regulatory capture, and I think that's actually a big part of the answer, and that is you will never get DFO to, on its own, on the merits, make a decision. They won't, because they've been captured by the industry that they're regulating. It's a common occurrence. It happens in many regulated industries. The industry that's being regulated captures them just because of regular contact and playing golf and having lunch. And it's not corruption. It's just, it happens organically. So the only way to really do it is to go through other means, and those people come back and force it on DFO. So writing letters to DFO, it's good. It gets on the record, but it's other means. So we're looking for those other means. We've been invited to help, and you explained very well, what that invitation means. So that's one way, but you have to look for a way around and then over top.
I went to bed pretty discouraged last night with the apparent futility of what we're up against, and capture being definitely one of the things. And I kind of thought past today, when the fishery closes, what would have to happen for that to take place? It'd have to be 3 people to agree to it. One would be Justin Trudeau. Trudeau announces that he's concerned about saving killer whales, Pacific salmon, Red Bear Rainforest, Canada, tourism. He loves that kind of thing. That's a carrot to him. And the other opportunity he has is to say that we closed the herring fishery before Alaska. And so, we like to beat the Americans at something. We've been on a losing streak for a couple of years. So, that's something that might be an incentive to him. So what I'm trying to outline is the kind of script that needs to enter that area of thinking, so that he can make a media event out of it that enhances his career. And do I have a question? No, I'm just pontificating. No one has said this yet, and it comes to the question of how do we break through on these things, okay? And I would really, when I finish in 1 more minute, I'd like to hear the response of people who are on the panel. Finally, Jimmy Patterson likes to be a benefactor. He's putting up wings of hospitals, and he owns all these companies, 700 companies, which are probably not really clearly defined under the Anti-Combines Act as being not, interfering with each other. So his carrot is that he gets to look good. He can come on and say he's concerned about his boys' fishing and careers, and he's kept on fishing down because of concern for them. But now we're going to retire that, and we're ready to move on. So there's an argument that could be placed in the bullseye of these people's thinking that could get us out of this without civil disobedience. However, you have to do what you have to do. So I'd really like to know if there's experience with this kind of, positive planting of both carrots and sticks in high political places.
I've only been working on this particular issue for about a year, so I'll defer to some of the other folks here who have more experience. But in that time, I think with Pacific Wild and Conservancy Hornby Island and all of our various partners, we've thought a lot about, what are some different arguments that we could make? Let's compare the value of tourism, marine-based tourism, other types of coastal economies that, directly or indirectly rely on thriving herring. Let's compare that to the value of the fishery. Let's talk about the ecosystem. Let's talk about the human rights abuses. Let's talk about, pardon? Yeah, reconciliation. We've thought about all these different angles, and I think they've had some uptake among people in the public, but in general, we have seen that that DFO can really just ignore these things. We aren't in a position, we aren't officially recognized stakeholders that they're required to consider these arguments. And so I think there's been a lot of just white noise a lot of the time with these conversations. They're talking about one thing based on their data and their modeling and the way that they understand the system, and we're talking about something else. So I don't think that we can assume that the people who have decision-making power, like some of the people you mentioned and maybe other actors in this system, that they're benevolent, that they're ultimately looking to, look good. I don't think that this issue is maybe big enough for that outside of this region, but the things that have closed these other fisheries down, the Haida Nation got an injunction against the commercial fishery, the Nechalath Tribal Council got an injunction against the fishery. They had to prove that based on the numbers of herring that the DFO was recognizing and what they understood the historical numbers to be, that there was going to be irrevocable harm to their ecosystem and their way of life from that fishery. And so that worked twice. The Celtic basically, from what I've heard from Ian, we're blockading boats and occupied the DFO office and said absolutely not. So it hasn't been a going softly into the night kind of situation. That's just my sort of take at this point. But that's not an answer, so I'll look to other people down the line for ideas, thoughts.
Or I think if I can put, this is from Conservancy Hornby Island. So we started 4 or 5 years ago, and we heard Gord John stand up, and the minister said back, it's science. So Kath and I went out, we took all the science we could. I got a box at home. It's about that deep, full of science reports. Everything we could get got it from David Ellis, a lot of it. And those numbers you saw of the migratory, I think they put there twice, migratory versus, that was done in 1990. We got that information. So we put all that into a report. So we got the science down. So we sent it to everybody. Here's the science. It's not, it just shows categorically what they're doing is not precautionary, it's not ecosystem based and all that stuff. So we thought the science, we thought, well, that didn't work very well. So we thought it's the court of public opinion. 135,000 signatures on a petition. Thought, wow, that should have an influence. Well, no, that didn't go over so well. Where are we at really? I think what's going to do it, it's going to be the people on this coast who have something nobody in this room has except one person. It's Aboriginal rights and title. It's reconciliation. I think as a community, as people here in this room, if we can support the folks that we can help and listen to what their issues are and how we can support them, as Ian's pointed out, and Vanessa, as you just stated, where you see on the coast where it got shut down before it was completely destroyed by the fisheries themselves shutting themselves down because the fish are gone, is I think that's where we need to focus our effort. If we can work through like what we heard at the forum in November, what we heard from the people yesterday, and we can build that, I think we've got something really valuable to take to Ottawa, because those are the folks that have something none of the rest of us have, and that's something the government legally have to listen to. And it's more than just the UN declaration, it's the reconciliation component of it that all the people in Canada to say it's going to drive some of these issues. So I don't have a question there. So somebody else? Oh, yes.
Yes, I was just going to say, Don Mateo, he worked closely with Stephanie Saline over Puget Sound Partnership. They have a model, I think, like when they have an issue with the president stripping the EPA and Puget Sound, the Environmental Protection Agency, he's doing that now. I'm doing some work with the tribes in Washington State, the UVIC's Indigenous Law Program with John Burroughs and Environmental Law Calvin Sanborn. And I'm preparing a civil suit for when an oil tanker finally crashes or discharges large amount of bitumen into the Salish Sea. We're going to be ready for a civil suit. So now with this, Puget Sound Partnership, they have a problem with the president and what's going on with the Environmental Protection Agency. They get on a plane, they fly to Washington, D.C. And I said this to Catherine, you know, we got to think about getting together the executive directors of NGOs. You find that works, Joe, in Washington State?
Yeah, they listen to you, because what you have to remember is that the people who have a fishing industry, they're not afraid to get on a plane and fly somewhere. And they're not afraid to show up at somebody's door over and over again. And they have, that's how that capture happens. And so you have to play the same game that they're playing.
Great, thank you.
So I was just gonna
sure.
add that, I mean, it's the most important question about this whole issue, and it's something that I know a lot of people dedicate every waking moment, you know, thinking like, how are we going to make this shift? How are we going to save this population of fish before they manage it into extinction like they have everywhere else? And I wish we had the answer. I mean, if we did, we'd be there already. So you know, the environmental groups don't have the answers to this, but I think collectively, people that care about this issue, that those answers do exist, and I think it is about those connections. I mean, we're with Calvin and other lawyers looking at any legal avenues that we might have. You know, we're putting up billboards and advertising. We're doing films. We're petitions and everything. All the tools in our kit are being used on this one. But this is an issue that affects all British Columbians. And look at the population size around the Salish Sea. We just need to mobilize people and increase our understanding of herring and the importance of herring within our populace. And then I think that shift is going to happen pretty quickly. But if you think of where we were just a few years ago, I mean, I know Bryony and others have been working on this issue for 30 years, but if we look at the poll results from general understanding of herring conservation, et cetera, 2 or 3 years ago, I think it's going to be dramatically different today. There's been a lot of work done in educating people generally, and there's certainly more that can be done on that front. So I guess I don't have the answers, but I always like when people say, I'm so concerned about the environment, what can I do? Go back into your sphere of influence, in your business, personal, professional lives. Reach out to all those people, and if everyone does that, you're going to have a huge network of people who care about this issue.
Thanks, Ian.
Personally, I think that the context of the perception of the population as a whole about what is happening to a planet, if I can broaden this, is now changing, because people are realizing that it is not only the cod in Canada or some antelope in Africa, but it is everywhere. The pollinators, the insect, everything is going down the tube. And people are realizing this. Old folk remember of the windows that were full of insects after we drove it. That's not happening anymore, and stuff like that. And it's beginning to be the discourse in the newspapers, in the editorials and stuff. So the herring in the Salish Sea is only one data point more, and it has the context of a discussion has changed. And people who say that we, as I have heard, that there have never been more herring in the Salish Sea. But here's that on occasion. We know now that this is ridiculous because we know that the shifting baseline concept is also well understood by the population at large. And so I think bombarding Ottawa with points about that, and especially because it sabotages reconciliation completely, should work.
Great, thank you.
I just want to add something to that. I think it's almost a cliche to say, like, speak to the children, let's educate the next generation. But I think as sort of the youngest person on this panel, although I'm not technically a youth still myself, I think we can see evidence of how willing the young generations are now to get out into the streets and step up and say that they care about this planet and they demand change. Just earlier this week, I slept on the lawn in front of the Legislative Assembly in Victoria with, just as like a small show of solidarity for the Indigenous youth who occupied that space for like 17 days in total, demanding recognition for the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. And we see like youth-led movements around climate change. We see a lot of youth engagement. This sort of next youngest generation, I think, doesn't have maybe the luxury of time that some of our other generations have had. And so I think it is a bit of a cliche, but I do think we need to, like, this room is not as age diverse as it could be. And I think these are people that we can talk to about this issue. This is close to home, and not, it's meaningful to bring the young people in your lives out to the beaches to look at the spawn, to learn to identify the birds that are out there. That's an important formative experience for them, that they, have the privilege to be in this place and still experience that. But it's also instilling that sense of responsibility that they, have a voice that they can use for the right things, that they can be good allies to First Nations who are taking action against this. I also want to just harken back to something that came up about this time last year when we raised, I think it was Grant, raised this question of where is all this herring meal and herring oil going from the carcasses of fish that are caught as part of the roe fishery that kind of become this byproduct. And, we were accusing DFO of sort of allowing the products of this herring fishery to be fed to Atlantic salmon and fish farms and being part of this cumulative pressure on our wild fish. And a spokesperson for the DFO basically said, like, we administer fisheries, but we are not responsible for what happens with the products of the catch of those fisheries. And so I think DFO is usually ready to see an opportunity for a fishery. If you have a great abundance of something somewhere and it's economically feasible to collect it, there's an option to create a fishery there, and that is something they will do. But they are not in the business necessarily of sort of taking charge of the whole system of which that fishery is a part. And I don't really think they're in the business of closing fisheries willingly. Maybe that's a question for Dr. Pauly of, what are the factors that actually close fisheries? Is there a record in Canada of DFO closing a fishery other than it no longer being economically feasible or there being no fish left to fish?
The best example is the northern cod, right? The northern cod was closed when, the horses already left the barn. This was a classical case. And it was something that was predictable and predicted. And the pity about the film that you didn't see is that there were lots of interviews with the Newfoundland fishermen who are small-scale fishers who described that he saw, and his colleagues saw the cod go, while the trawlers did not. Because the trawlers could go where the few cod left were, whereas the small-scale fishers all along the coast could not. And so they fill in sheets, so-called little piece of paper that reported the catch. And these sheets that they have to fill in every day, thousands of them went to a warehouse, and they were never analyzed. The DFO requires the fishers to do that, but they were never analyzed. And from there, you could have seen that the cod was getting more and more substocks of cod were getting wiped out until the last one was, but it was there, and there was one left. But the trawlers that they had completely captured the DFO at the time, the trawlers did not experience a decline of their catch per day or catch per effort because they went where the cods, where the last cod were. And for that reason, there was a contradiction between the small-scale fisheries report and the big-time fisheries, the big fisheries report. And the DFO decided to ignore the small-scale fishing, though all the data that they had, even though the best scientists in Newfoundland was telling them, and the small-scale fishers were screaming. Now, I conclude that story by saying, in addition to that, the cod didn't seem to recover, and it was because it continued to be fished. When, after the moratorium, it continued to be fished as bycatch of other fisheries, but it's not reported. It's not reported. That would have been also in a film yesterday, that essentially when a fishery is not targeted, then the DFO assumes that nothing is caught. And so, this is not surprised that the cod did not recover. It continued to be fished. Also, the Nufi could fish 5 fish per day per person. And that was enough to keep, because there was very little to keep them down. And now come the punch. Now that the cod, in spite of this continued pressure, managed to come up from 100 to 1, or 1,000 to 1, biomass-wise, and it went to 2, 3. Well, they opened the fishery again. And what kind of fishery did they open? A trawl fishery. So the point, the gentleman here was making the point that the DFO cannot, from inside, change its style, its attitude, its operation, mode of operation. It can only come from outside. It can only come because they are forced by the minister or the political climate to change. That happened from inside, it will never happen.
Brady.
That's fine. I'm just wondering, Lauren, if you wanted to come up and speak to this, because certainly the Wasatch leadership are the hereditary, like Eric Pelkey is the hereditary chief of his territory, which is extensive. It is the same issue. It's the same issue as what's going on at Stoughton, and that's a really simple thing to write down. Is that government's cherry picking who they want to listen to, and right now I don't know. They say that they consult. I'm learning. I'm not sure who they're consulting, because we've talked just about everybody. The consultant, yeah, they're consulting the consultant. That's a good one. So it's, so if you're, this is where I think we should be, and I wanted to hand it over to Lauren, because this is something of.
The cod fishery on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Any of you go to Port Renfrew?
Yeah.
Do you ever remember the gas station there? Gary Pearson was running that. He had an aquarium there. He was a diver in the Canadian Navy for years. He retired from the Canadian Navy. He had an saltwater aquarium. And he watched him. You know how things can slow down in Port Renfrew, so I guess he just sit there and meditate on his aquarium. And he watched him spawning. The time the cod are spawning is when DFO opens a fishery. The cod fishery. So they're wiping out the cod fishery, because what the cod do is if their spawn is interrupted, they stop breeding and they don't go back to spawning. They'll leave it. So that's part of this whole process as well. But with Calvin Sanborn, he's a real sweetheart at the Environmental Law Clinic at UVic, trying to find the common ground with the Settler Society. I've been asked by an Aboriginal advisor for DFO, after we get back from Vancouver next week at a Restoration Fund meeting, this Aboriginal advisor for DFO said, Lauren, can I get some time with you? And I said, well, what do you want? He said, I'm wondering if you could help us, find a way to reconcile between Settler Society and First Nations around all the issues that we're facing. So the one thing you got to remember, and what Brioni's talking about with hereditary, my friend Don Ryans, the Gitxsan hereditary chief, spent 32 years of his life getting Delgamuukw to court when they finally won. And these issues they dealt with these 50 years ago. So the thing that Calvin talks about with me anyways, is he says, we'll do that and we'll get involved in that, but we have to have a champion. And it has to be a campaign. This isn't a one-off thing. So Don Ryan says the same thing, right? So here, what's missing here, when I went off on my tirade yesterday, that was very deliberate, right? Because if you want to know about Indians, learn about Indians. So that when they walk through the door and you sit down, you greet people, you welcome them. You know, you here at Chai, Grant took us out in a boat yesterday. You know, we haven't raised him up. We got to raise him up and say, and I was on your boat, and I worked on a trawler off the west coast of the island. And we're in a big, heavy wind off the west coast. And the waves were breaking over the wheelhouse, and the skipper says, go out and man the deck pump. I said, are you crazy? He said, the bilge pump can't handle all the water we're taking out. So it was an old trawler, and the deck pump, the handle for it weighed about 40 pounds, was cast iron. So I'm sitting there out in the back deck, pumping away with this heavy handle. About every 5 or 6 pumps at it, go over the side and puke my guts out, and then go back to pumping. So I was flashing on these things when we were on your boat last night, right? It was great, but we got to raise him up too, right? That's reconciliation. You can't expect government to do it. We have to do it with each other, right? And we have to collaborate. So I meet with DFO, and Grant's right on the money. Yesterday he talked about the province. And he's right, because Canada and BC, the Premier, John Horgan, and the Prime Minister signed an agreement not to throw mud at each other over the salmon issue. That's why they created that $158 million salmon fund, Canada Salmon Fund. Ocean Protection Plan, OPP, why was that established? Oh, that's because of shipping. It's not about the Orca, it's not about the salmon, it's about the oil tankers and about the container ships coming into RBT too. So, where do you put the squeeze? You don't put the squeeze on DFO, you put the squeeze on Transport Canada, who has the largest budget in the federal family. Then you put the squeeze on Minister of Infrastructure, and then you go over here. You go here, what you haven't done is you find your champion, you find a First Nations person that'd be willing to go to the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. Do a presentation. Could you please give us a letter of support to move this forward to federal government, the issue of the herring? Then we go across the street and we go to the BC Assembly First Nations. 203 chiefs sit in that BC AFM. Present to them in 20 minutes, ask them to support it. They'll give you that support, I guarantee you. You get on a plane, you fly to Ottawa, you meet with the Grand Chief AFM. We got the support from UBCIC, we got the support from BC AFM. Now we're asking you, Grand Chief, for the same. So then you come back. You got the NGOs, you got executive directors here, you have to get together, right? And say, now we'll do a letter of support for each other. Now we get together, now that's kind of like the golf course, having coffee and going golfing with the ministers and stuff. In a way, it's that same model, but, right? So that's the way I see what what she's talking about is us exercising, right? The Indians. And I say I'm an Indian because I did review panel for Roberts Bank Terminal 2. I said I'm an Indian because I'm governed by the Indian Act still. So I'm an Indian. I'm not First Nations, I'm not Indigenous, I'm an Indian. Until we get rid of the Indian Act, I'm an Indian. So that's where our power lies. And I have a right to be a burden on the Crown.
There's the answer right there. That is the answer. Thank you so much for saying that. One little point. I can't remember where I read this, but I got a box this big of herring stuff, or I got a box this big about legal cases around Aboriginal stuff. One of those cases went to the Supreme Court of Canada. And the province was there and the federal government was there. And they were arguing amongst themselves. The judge got really mad and said, no, you out of here. You come back, you are one crown. It's indivisible. Just because the Canadian Constitution back sometime said there's the province and the federal government, no, there's one crown. And that's, I think, what you're talking about. And that's why I think Victoria is important in this. It's a whole lot easier for us to get to Victoria than it is to get all the way to Ottawa. And so I think we do have to get, Scott Fraser is our MLA for right here. So there's somebody I think we can work with. He wants to get elected next May 5th, next year. Brian, please.
Well, I just wanted to say that Lauren's been a big part of our planning, and HKCM to you, Lauren, for all your work. This is not just a focal species, this is a cultural keystone species. This was family. Herring were family. Lauren will tell you, herring were family. And so the transplant, I think, was a well-known way of restoring herring populations. And there has been some research done into it. More needs to be done. This is part of what I want to propose, which is the herring recovery plan. I want everyone to write and say, this is our moment for reconciliation. Let's get a big sum of money and give it to these communities that know they still got the memory and the knowledge and the ability. And here's my point about the climate change, is it still worth it? Well, herring are incredibly resilient species. The fact that they live from California to Alaska, hey folks, they've got some genetic diversity there that is pretty good, I would say. And we're right in the middle. We're not at the southernmost end. We're not at the North Pole. We're right in the middle. So we've got the ability to see if there's the diversity within our population to withstand warming temperatures and adapt. And the best people to know how they're adapting are the people that live right there in the bay. And then we've also diversified. We've spread our eggs in the basket. And I want to see that herring recovery plan start immediately.
All right, so thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's been an amazing day. CHI are taking from here, we're going to develop a herring recovery program. You'll hear it. You're going to hear it ad nausea. We'll put a draft together. We'll get it out to you. We're going to work with Lauren and his people. We're going to work with the Comox. We've had Chief Acoma out yesterday. We had Bryony with the hereditary Chief Carey from Comox. The folks are out there, the Wasanic people, Eric Pelkey. We're going to work with them. We'll get this herring recovery program together, and we'll keep fighting. And we're going to work with Lauren and all of us together. So we shall. Daniel, thank you for your words from Churchill. I thought you dreamt. Did you tell him to say those words? Anyway, thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks, amazing Joe.